Hello and welcome back. The last time I did a video, we had basic levels done, player movement, enemy AI, shooting. Um, I decided since then to add a few things. I did player inventory, and the player inventory allows the player to pick up certain items that are designated on the items layer and add them to an item list and populate an inventory as shown here on the side. I'll demonstrate a bit how that works. We have, let's see, a circuit over here. Now this circuit, it could be any game object you want, as long as the game object is on the items layer. And we do this so when it's doing its on collider events like the on trigger enter, it's not looking for everything, it's just looking for what's on that items layer, so no enemies, no player, and whatnot. um, you also need so originally I had an item script that every every item, even batteries and other types of items, would derive from. Right now, I I've changed the way that works because I'm pulling in from JSON files, which I'll explain a bit in another video how I'm doing that. But anyway, so for the item pickup script, all this is doing is uh, giving the item a name and pointing it towards uh, like when we pull in an item, it's gonna just take in the item name, and then when we want to actually put it into our inventory, we're we're searching the other item inventory by item name, and I'll explain that a bit after. So the other thing is obviously a box collider. It needs some way to detect that the player has ran over it. So we'll run that. So there's our item right here. If we look in our inventory, there's nothing in there. We walk over top of it, and there's our one test item. So why it has, let me maximize this. Um, so why it has no picture there is because I've told uh, I've told the inventory to look into the resources folder for the same exact sprite as it's named, and that way anyone can go into the resources folder and they could replace the sprite with whatever they wanted. That way it makes it a lot more modular and easy to change. So right now in the resources folder, I do not have that file name because I just came up with the name. If you see circuit, it goes by this test item name. So the sprite in the resources folder has to be exactly like that. And if we look over in resources where it's pulling from, and I believe it's pulling from items or UI. It's pulling from here, UI item icon. So it has to reside in this folder for it to be pulled over. And so to test that, this PCB icon we got going on here, I could actually just rename this PCB. All right. We launch this game again. Walk over top of it, and there we go. So it shows the correct icon there. And so how I've done this, we'll look over at the item manager. So this will be attached to the player, and if it's not attached to the player, no big deal. The player just can't pick up the items. I've made it so the player isn't dependent on it, and the item manager isn't dependent on the player. it works. You could actually throw it on an enemy if you want. So we'll start up here. We create these slots because we want this idea of an inventory. And to upgrade his inventory, we're going to have these storage modules. So anyway, so you're defining your slots list there, and then you define how big it is later. All right, so in the awake, we're just getting a lot of references to the player canvas in the crafting panel and whatnot there. Nothing too big going on there. Setting the inventory canvas. This is using canvas groups. That way you can turn them off and on. You can set the alpha, block raycast, and interactable, so you won't be able to push any buttons, even if the alpha was at 1 and you could see it, and this was at false, you wouldn't be able to push the buttons. That's pretty much how that works. And then it calls this create slots method, which is further down here. So this method, you have to give it an integer value, and our integer value is the inventory size. And right now, I've just threw in 20, but we want this to be upgradable. So eventually, you're gonna say, okay, the player has an upgrade. Let's set the inventory size to 50, whatever. And when this starts up, or when this, it won't matter for the start because it's already started. But when this method is called again, it goes through and starts clearing out everything and recreates the inventory again, right? And because you're using lists of items, you don't lose the data. You're just starting from scratch or recreating the slots, and you're throwing the stuff back in there again. So that's how that works. So this is again getting all the components. So this item list is like a container, and every slot goes inside that container. So it's grabbing them all, and for all of them, going through them all. That's not equal to the item list, obviously, because I think it grabs the transform of the parent as well. That's why that's there. And it destroys them all. Fine, done. Then you go, this is our slots list. That is right, that we've defined up here. Okay, so your slots list, you're clearing it. You're getting rid of all the slots. And then you're now recreating this with a for loop, and so that's basic for loop stuff. So I is less than 20, and it's going to keep going through, and it's going to instantiate an item slot inside there. Now this doesn't add anything to the inventory. That's all. It's just adding the slot. That's all that work. That's how that works. Go down to clear inventory. That's just a command that clears it out. So now you have to initialize your inventory. You have the slots done. Now let's look at what's going on here. So the reason why I have this return here is our inventory, because of the way I have it set up with JSON files, is it has to exist in the database manager. So it pulls this in right away, and if you don't have the database manager, then there's no point in even going ahead with this. All right. So it's doing another for loop for the slots.count. So now we're counting how many slots. That's why you added it to a list up here, right? In the create slots, you add it to a list right here, and that way you have kind of a count and an inventory of how many slots you have. And now you're going to go through it again, and you're going to start populating it with if you have anything in your inventory, right? So what it's saying here is that because the player's inventory actually resides on the database manager, not on the player itself, which I originally had, it resides there. So you want to go count -1 because the array index starts at 0, right? But the count, as soon as you have one item, it's at 1, right? So you want it to start here at 0. Start populating the list. Uh, so you're starting to populate, let me show you here, this information that's thrown in here. I don't, if you remember, there was an icon and then the item description, and that's pretty much what that is doing. Well, that's exactly what that is doing. It's doing the quantity, the description, and the image icon if it exists. I actually it didn't error out. I'm wondering if I should have been checking if it's there or not, but it didn't error out anyway. It just put a blank image there. Well, maybe I should put a check. Okay, so that being said and done, we now have a method for adding items. Anytime you walk over an item, which most of the items we're getting is from a loop manager that I created. Okay, what this does is you don't actually see the physical items. You open a chest and the items populate into your inventory based on these loot drop values that I have set up. But anyway, it populates it. Uh, so that's why that method is here. But you also will use it if you do have a physical object, which you can, and you pick them up. The only reason I don't have the item as a physical object, I have item pickup instead, is because I'm not using I am not using like mono behaviors from Unity here. I'm not calling it an object. I'm creating my own class for it. So I can't have a physical object from what I know anyway. This was a workaround. I'm sure there's a better way of doing it. So where was I? Add item. Okay. So play a sound for the item pickup. Item exists equals false. We're setting this right away. This is for our checks to see if it exists, because if if you already have the item, you don't want to just add another instance of it. I mean, you can, I guess. But what I really just want to do is add to the quantity of it, right? So uh, set that right away and go through, use this for each to go through your player's inventory. So if the item that we're picking up, like it comes from up here, you're passing in the item pickup name, right? And you're saying if the item name from item, I know this is getting confusing, but because these two are kind of linked, I've linked them together in this way. It may be confusing, but all it's doing is checking if we already have it in our player's inventory, and if we do, fine, destroy it, right? We're gonna debug logout. We don't really need that right now. And then go into that item that we picked up and adjust its item quantity by 1. And item exists is true. And this is set for a reason, because if you go down here, this is only called if item exists equals false. Right? So it would actually skip this. But so say we never even did that. Say we never found it. It would just add it, right? It's just going to add it to the player's inventory. Again, another debug I don't really need. And I was disabling colliders, but we're destroying it anyway, right? You don't need it. Okay, so if we go down further, we have the on-trigger enter. This is where the player interacts with the item. Without this, you can't, the colliders can't interact. You need to know something has picked it up, or well, this is the item manager is actually on the player, so it needs to know the player's collider has collided with something that relates to an item that we're looking for. So immediately I'm saying inventory size is less than 0. Just get out of here. Don't even bother continuing, right? Because we don't need, no matter what. If you walk over it, we're not picking it over. We're not picking it up, sorry, and so it'll just stay there in the scene. Let's make sure no items are picked up. So again, another check to make sure we actually have a database manager, an instance of it anyway, because I've made it static. Any class can access it. We're going in there. Instance player count is greater than the inventory size or equal to the inventory size. This is just an error check, right? It's saying that we have no space left. That's pretty much what that's saying. And then it's just returning. It's kicking it back out. That didn't happen though. We never even got into this. We're now actually looking for the item. This actually should be up further. We should do this check first so it's not checking everything. Anyway, so it's checking the layer that the item is on. If it's there, then let's do another check. Let's make sure it's got the component item pickup. And if it does, all right. I cached it here, but you could have just called it right in here. Anyway, so I'm getting the component item pickup. I'm caching it into here. And now I'm calling that method that we've seen above, that add item method, remember? So it takes an item pickup, add item does, right? And you're passing it into here, and then we're looping all the way through again, and that's how it works. In the update, I think I was using this for, oh yeah, if the enemy had this item manager on itself, I don't want when I push the E key, I don't want it to affect the enemy at all because he's not opening up an inventory a window. He's not doing any of that. Uh, he can use the inventory just like I am, but he doesn't need a screen in front of him. So just return. That's just for the enemy code. And again, if you have no inventory canvas, what's the point of going in here, right? You don't need to be in here because all this is for is to display the inventory window, right? And it's just a bunch of we're calling the inventory init every time you do this. Every time you want to go open the instead of in the update constantly polling to see if if items have changed, only when you push the E key are we now checking if items have changed, and we're doing the inventory init to repopulate. Again, this is all just turning windows off and on. If you look, there is so we have the inventory canvas, but inside of here there's actually two different canvases that they're separate from each other. You see, this one controls just the inventory, and this one is the crafting menu. So that's pretty much how that works. I'll show you a bit on this. So instead of picking that up right there, you can go over here and just push the F key and open that thing up, right? If you open that up, you've now populated your inventory. You see we have 31 there. If we go over to these two here, push F, we should have more, and there they are, right? And I'll show a bit more of that later. How all these items are pulled in from the JSON files. So yeah, I guess that's it for now, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you another time.